Hi everybody, and welcome to another ASMR sleep story. In tonight's video, we're going to be talking about Zionism, a dream that built a nation. So let's get started. Zionism is a movement that emerged in the late 19th century with one clear and enduring goal: the national revival of the Jewish people as a sovereign nation in their ancestral homeland, a call for self-determination after centuries of statelessness and exile. At its core, Zionism is the modern expression of a centuries-old yearning, the return to the land of Israel and the renewal of a centralized Jewish life. But Zionism is far more than a political ideology. It is deeply rooted in Jewish history, identity, and culture. It reflects a collective awakening, a response to centuries of displacement, persecution, and the struggle for survival. In many ways, Zionism represents the culmination of Jewish resilience, a movement that sought not only a safe refuge, but also the restoration of a living, thriving Jewish nation. Understanding Zionism is essential for grasping a central chapter of Jewish history and its profound impact on the world. This story shapes the modern state of Israel, influences Jewish communities worldwide, and offers insight into how a people reconnected with their heritage and land against immense odds. In this video, I will explore Zionism through a historical and cultural lens. I will trace the roots of this movement and visionaries who shaped it, and the gradual realization of their dream. This story reveals the enduring spirit and vision behind the modern Jewish state, from the early sparks of national consciousness to the challenges and triumphs of building a nation. This is the story of a people's hope transformed into a reality, a journey of identity, determination, and renewal. The 19th century was a time of tremendous upheaval and transformation for Jewish communities across Europe. As the continent experienced sweeping political, social, and intellectual changes, Jewish life faced both new opportunities and daunting challenges. This period laid much of the groundwork for the emergence of Zionism, as Jews grappled with questions of identity, belonging, and survival in a rapidly changing world. In Western and Central Europe, the 19th century brought the era of Jewish emancipation. This process, which unfolded unevenly across countries, granted Jews civil rights, legal equality, and opportunities previously denied to them. In places like France, Germany, and Austria, Jews were slowly integrated into broader society, gaining access to education, professions, and political participation. Emancipation inspired many Jews to embrace assimilation, adopting the language, dress, and many customs of their non-Jewish neighbors. For some, this meant a hopeful vision that Jewish identity could be harmonized within national cultures. Intellectuals and artists participated fully in European life, contributing to literature, science, philosophy, and the arts. Yet assimilation also raised profound questions. How could Jews maintain their distinct heritage while integrating into modern nation-states? Could Jewish tradition survive the pressures to conform? And above all, would emancipation truly guarantee safety and acceptance? For many, the answer remained uncertain. While emancipation brought some freedoms, it did not erase the deep-rooted prejudices against Jews that persisted across Europe. In Eastern Europe, particularly within the Russian Empire, the situation was far more precarious. The vast majority of European Jews lived in these regions, often confined to the Pale of Settlement, a designated area where Jewish residency was legally restricted. Here, Jews faced widespread discrimination, social exclusion, and harsh economic restrictions. Anti-Semitism was not only a social attitude, but was often codified into law. Violent outbreaks, known as pogroms, organized massacres and attacks against Jewish communities became tragically common. These pogroms, often incited or tolerated by local authorities, devastated towns and villages, destroying homes, businesses, and lives. The constant threat of violence created a climate of fear and instability. Jewish communities struggled to survive amid poverty and overcrowding. This reality starkly contrasted with the more helpful, emancipated Jews in Western Europe and underscored the profound divide within the Jewish world. The 19th century was also the century of nationalism. Across Europe, various ethnic and cultural groups sought self-determination and statehood. Italians, Germans, Poles, Hungarians, and others embraced ideas of national identity rooted in language, culture, and a shared history. These movements transformed the political map of Europe and inspired many oppressed peoples to envision a future as independent nations. For Jews, this rise of nationalism presented a paradox. On one hand, the nationalist spirit inspired hope for greater acceptance as fellow citizens within emerging nation-states. On the other hand, nationalism often emphasized ethnic or religious homogeneity, making Jews feel increasingly alienated or targeted as outsiders. This dilemma became known as the Jewish question, a term used in political and intellectual circles to debate the status and future of Jews in Europe. Some advocated for complete assimilation, believing that Jews should abandon their distinct identity to become full members of their host nations. Others championed cultural autonomy or special protections. But many Jewish thinkers and leaders came to realize that assimilation alone could not solve the problems Jews faced. They saw that centuries of persecution and exclusion pointed to deeper challenges. The question arose, could Jews be accepted as equal citizens anywhere without a nation of their own? Amid these struggles, a new Jewish national consciousness began to grow. Influenced by broader European nationalist movements, some Jewish intellectuals started to envision a Jewish nation. Not simply a religious community, but a people with its own language, culture, and land. This awakening was further fueled by the harsh realities of pogroms and systemic anti-Semitism. For many Jews, the dream of return to the ancestral homeland moved from spiritual hope to urgent political necessity. The challenges of 19th century Europe thus created the fertile ground for Zionism's emergence. It was a response not only to oppression, but also to the profound questions of identity, belonging, and the future of the Jewish people. Zionism promised a new chapter, one where Jews could be masters of their own fate, united by language, culture, and land. Before Zionism took formal political shape, The ideas that would fuel its rise were already circulating among Jewish thinkers deeply concerned about the future of their people. One of the early voices was Leon Pinsker, a Russian Jewish physician and activist who in 1882 wrote a seminal pamphlet titled Auto-Emancipation. Pinsker argued that Jewish suffering and exclusion were not simply matters of social prejudice, but rooted in the absence of a nation-state for Jews. He believed that only through self-rule and national independence could Jews secure safety and dignity. Around the same time, Moses Hess, a philosopher and one of the founders of modern socialism, had also begun advocating for Jewish national revival. His 1862 work, Rome and Jerusalem, laid out the idea that Jewish emancipation in Europe was an illusion. Jews would always be outsiders without their own land. Hess connected Jewish national identity with cultural and historical roots in the land of Israel, inspiring later Zionist thinkers. These early voices were crucial in shaping the ideological groundwork of political Zionism, emphasizing that Jewish identity was not only religious, but also national and cultural. This marked a significant shift from the previous centuries, where Jewish identity had been primarily religious and diasporic. With these ideas in place, various thinkers and activists began forming the initial movements that would evolve into political Zionism. Figures like Nathan Birnbaum and Moses Lillenblum were instrumental in promoting the idea of Jewish national consciousness. Birnbaum coined the term Zionism in the early 1890s, and both men emphasized the need for a Jewish homeland as a solution to persecution and statelessness. However, even in these early stages, there were debates and differing visions about what Zionism should be. Some advocated for a purely cultural revival, strengthening Jewish language, education, and traditions. Others pushed for a political and territorial solution, emphasizing the urgent need for a Jewish state or autonomous region. This diversity of thought reflected broader tensions within Jewish communities. Western European Jews, many of whom were more assimilated, were often skeptical or indifferent toward political nationalism. In contrast, Eastern European Jews, facing harsher persecution, were more likely to support Zionist goals. Political Zionism did not arise in a vacuum. It was part of a larger wave of nationalist movements sweeping through Europe in the 19th century. Nations across the continent were seeking to define themselves through shared language, culture, and territory. From Italy and Germany to the Balkans, these movements influenced Jewish intellectuals who began to see their own people as a nation with a unique history and a right to self-determination. This era's nationalist ideas provided a framework for Jews to think about their identity not just in religious terms, but also politically and nationally. Zionism emerged as the expression of this new consciousness, asserting that Jews were a people entitled to sovereignty in their ancestral homeland. At the core of political Zionism was a response to the realities of modern Europe: rampant anti-Semitism, violent pogroms. Theodor Herzl is widely recognized as the visionary founder of modern political Zionism, the movement that transformed Jewish national aspirations into an organized, pragmatic political effort aimed at establishing a Jewish homeland. His leadership galvanized Jewish communities worldwide. creating a movement that continues to shape Jewish identity and Israeli statehood today. Theodor Herzl was born on May 2nd, 1860, in Pest, Hungary, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, into a well-to-do, assimilated Jewish family. Raised in a German-speaking, secular Jewish milieu, Herzl was steeped in the ideas of European Enlightenment. From a young age, he excelled academically and pursued law before shifting his career toward journalism and literature. Herzl moved to Vienna, the vibrant capital of the empire, where he worked as a journalist and theatre critic. At this time, he embodied the typical assimilated Jew of the European bourgeoisie, confident in the ideals of emancipation and integration. Many Jews like Herzl believed that through education and political loyalty, Jews would eventually be fully accepted as equal citizens in their respective countries. However, beneath the surface of European modernity lurked persistent anti-Semitism, which periodically erupted into hostility and violence. Herzl himself experienced subtle social exclusion and discrimination despite his assimilation, but like many of his contemporaries, he initially regarded these as temporary or isolated incidents. Herzl's outlook changed dramatically in the late 1890s. During his time as a correspondent in Paris, covering the infamous Dreyfus affair. This episode involved Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer in the French army who was falsely accused and convicted of treason in a trial rife with anti-Semitism. The public and institutional vilification of Dreyfus shocked Herzl deeply. He witnessed firsthand the virulent, organized hatred directed at Jews, not only from the masses, but from government and military institutions. The affair revealed the deep-seated nature of European anti-Semitism, making it clear that even well-assimilated Jews could never fully escape prejudice or persecution. For Herzl, this was a turning point. He concluded that assimilation was no guarantee of safety or acceptance, and that Jewish emancipation within European societies was an illusion. In his private diary, Herzl reflected that the Jews were a nation, not just a religious community, and like other nations, deserved a homeland of their own. This insight became the foundation for Herzl's later work. The establishment of a Jewish state as a practical, necessary response to centuries of Jewish vulnerability in the diaspora. In 1896, Herzl published Der Judenstaat, or The Jewish State, a groundbreaking pamphlet that articulated his vision for Jewish national self-determination. In it, Herzl argued that anti-Semitism was a permanent and insoluble problem in Europe, and that the Jewish people must take control of their destiny by founding a sovereign state. Herzl's proposal was bold and innovative. He envisioned a modern, secular Jewish state, established primarily in Palestine, though he was open to other locations if necessary. Crucially, he stressed the importance of diplomacy and international law, advocating for Jewish settlement, backed by formal recognition from world powers. The pamphlet laid out not only the moral cause for Jewish self-determination, but also practical steps, creating a Jewish organization to lead the effort, purchasing land, encouraging Jewish immigration, and building political alliances. Herzl's blend of idealism with political realism was unprecedented. He saw Zionism not as a romantic religious revival, but as a concrete political movement with clear goals and methods. Der Judenstaat electrified Jewish communities and sparked heated debates. Many were inspired by its vision, while others worried about the risks or preferred assimilationist paths. Nonetheless, it marked the beginning of organized political Zionism. Herzl's next major step was convening the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland in August 1897. This was the first time that Jewish delegates from across Europe and beyond gathered formally to discuss the future of the Jewish people and to create a unified movement. The Congress adopted the Basel Program, which declared the goal of establishing a home for the Jewish people in Palestine, secured by public law. This statement gave Zionism a clear public political mission and transformed Jewish nationalism from an abstract idea into an organized political campaign. Herzl was elected president of the World Zionist Organization, the new umbrella body tasked with directing Zionist activities worldwide. His leadership was characterized by tireless diplomacy, strategic thinking, and an unyielding commitment to the cause. At the Congress, Herzl faced internal challenges, including opposition from Orthodox Jews who feared secular nationalism, and from assimilationists who rejected the need for a separate Jewish state. Herzl navigated these tensions with pragmatism, emphasizing unity and the urgency of action. Beyond ideological work, Herzl's practical approach involved extensive diplomatic outreach. He understood that realizing the Zionist dream required political recognition and cooperation from great powers. Herzl sought audiences with world leaders, including Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria-Hungary, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Sultan Abdul Hamid II of the Ottoman Empire, who ruled Palestine at the time, and British officials. He presented Zionism as a solution to the Jewish question and an opportunity for regional stability and development. Though many leaders were cautious or dismissive, Herzl's diplomacy was groundbreaking. He positioned Zionism as a legitimate political movement, paving the way for future international support. Herzl also explored proposals beyond Palestine, considering alternatives such as Uganda, but he remained convinced that the ancestral land was the spiritual and historical center of Jewish aspirations. At the core of Herzl's work was a passionate belief in Jewish self-determination. He envisioned a Jewish state that was modern, democratic, and pluralistic, a homeland where Jews could live with dignity, freedom, and equality. Herzl's vision was also a cultural and spiritual renaissance. He believed Zionism could unite the fragmented Jewish diaspora, bridging divisions between religious and secular Jews, Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities, and different social classes. He famously wrote in his diary, "If you will it, it is no dream." This phrase encapsulated his conviction that national revival was achievable through collective will and organized effort. Though Herzl passed away prematurely in 1904, his legacy shaped the entire Zionist movement and inspired generations to work towards statehood. His pragmatic strategies, political insight, and visionary ideals laid the foundation for the eventual establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Herzl's groundbreaking work culminated in the First Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, a historic event that transformed Jewish national aspirations into a structured political movement. However, the founding of the World Zionist Organization was only the beginning of a complex and dynamic process of growth, institution building, ideological negotiation, and community engagement. The subsequent Zionist congresses, held roughly every 2 years, became the central forum for shaping the Zionist vision. The establishment of permanent institutions was crucial to transforming Zionism from a passionate idea into a practical movement capable of achieving tangible goals. The World Zionist Organization, under Herzl's leadership and his successors, sought to unify diverse Jewish communities worldwide around the shared aim of establishing a Jewish homeland. The World Zionist Organization served as a political and administrative body that coordinated activities, raised funds, and negotiated with governments. It became the representative voice of Zionism on the international stage and worked tirelessly to promote Jewish settlement in Palestine. One of the most significant institutional achievements was the founding of the Jewish National Fund, or Keren Kayemet LeIsrael, in 1901. The Jewish National Fund was established to purchase land in Ottoman Palestine, exclusively for Jewish settlement. This idea of land purchase was revolutionary. It created a legal, financial, and practical foundation for Jewish agricultural and urban development. The fund relied on donations from Jews worldwide and became a symbol of collective ownership and commitment to the land. Over time, the JNF acquired hundreds of thousands of acres, planting forests, draining swamps, and building infrastructure, turning the vision of a Jewish homeland into a growing reality on the ground. The World Zionist Organization and Jewish National Fund together created a framework that allowed for coordinated immigration, or Aliyah, settlement planning, and community organization, essential steps toward eventual statehood. The Zionist congresses were not only political assemblies, but vibrant arenas of ideological debate. As the movement grew, it encompassed Jews from diverse backgrounds, religious affiliations, and political perspectives. These differences sparked rich, sometimes contentious, discussions about what Zionism should be. One of the key debates was the role of religion in the Zionist project. Early Zionism was largely secular, led by intellectuals like Herzl, who saw national revival primarily in political and cultural terms. Many secular Zionists aimed to create a modern Jewish society, embracing new forms of education, language revival, and social organization, while leaving the traditional religious practice outside the core national framework. However, religious Jews were divided. Some opposed Zionism, viewing the establishment of a Jewish state before the coming of the Messiah as forbidden or heretical. Others, the religious Zionists, believed that the return to the land of Israel was a divine mandate and sought to integrate Jewish law and spirituality into the national project. These tensions played out in Congress debates over the inclusion of religious symbols, the status of kosher dietary laws in the emerging society, and the role of rabbinic authority in new settlements. The movement gradually evolved to accommodate diverse expressions of Jewish identity, but the question of religion and nationalism remains a central theme in Zionism's history. Cultural debates were also prominent. Zionism sought not only political sovereignty, but a revival of the Hebrew language and culture, seen as key to Jewish national identity. However, there were disagreements about how much Hebrew should dominate daily life, especially given the widespread use of Yiddish, Ladino, and other Jewish languages. Some Zionists emphasized the new Jewish Sabra identity. Native-born, physically robust, Hebrew-speaking, that would contrast with the diasporic image of Jews as weak or marginalized. This ideal inspired cultural experiments in music, theatre, art, and education, but also generated friction with communities deeply connected to their diasporic languages and traditions. Settling communities was another major topic. Zionists debated where and how to establish these communities. Should the focus be agricultural kibbutzim and moshavim, emphasizing communal labor and socialist ideals? Or should more urban, private property settlements be encouraged? These choices reflected broader ideological divides between socialist Zionists, revisionists, and others. The Zionist movement's message was met with a wide spectrum of responses across the global Jewish diaspora, ranging from enthusiastic support to skepticism and outright opposition. In Eastern Europe, where Jews faced frequent persecution, pogroms, and harsh restrictions, Zionism found many passionate supporters. For many, the promise of a safe homeland was a powerful response to the precariousness of diaspora life. Zionist youth movements flourished, encouraging Aliyah and pioneering work in Palestine. Yet even here, some communities remained skeptical, prioritizing efforts for civil rights within their home countries or aligning with socialist or communist ideologies that rejected nationalism. In Western Europe and America, where Jews were often better integrated and enjoyed more political freedoms, Zionism sometimes struggled to gain traction. Many Jews were comfortable with assimilation and feared that Zionism might provoke anti-Semitism or question their loyalty to their countries. In the United States, the movement initially had modest support, and only after the rise of Nazi persecution in the 1930s did American Jewry rally more fully behind Zionism. Opposition also came from within the Jewish religious establishment. The ultra-Orthodox communities, particularly in Eastern Europe, organized anti-Zionist groups that argued the movement was secular and contravened traditional Messianic beliefs. These groups feared that nationalism would replace religious devotion and that establishing a state by human effort before divine redemption was a theological error. The debates within the Sephardi and Mizrahi communities were complex as well. Many from Middle Eastern and North African backgrounds were cautious, given their relative stability under Ottoman and later Arab rule. They often saw Zionism as a European Ashkenazi project and were concerned about cultural domination or displacement. Despite these divisions, Zionist institutions worked to engage diverse Jewish communities. The movement sponsored education programs, Hebrew language classes, fundraising campaigns, and organized Aliyah efforts tailored to different regions. The World Zionist Organization's political lobbying efforts helped create international awareness, while grassroots activism ensured Zionism reached broad layers of Jewish society. The Zionist congresses became a unifying forum, continually evolving to reflect the challenges and opportunities of the growing movement. By the early 20th century, Zionism had transformed from Herzl's initial dream into a complex, multifaceted global campaign. The congresses passed resolutions on critical issues such as immigration policy, land acquisition, and Jewish labor, setting priorities that influenced the development of the Jewish community in Palestine, the Yishuv. These assemblies also reflected Zionism's gradual shift from an elite intellectual project into a mass movement, mobilizing not only political leaders, but also farmers, workers, youth, and women. The Zionist congresses helped solidify a shared sense of purpose and identity, bridging the vast geographical and cultural distances separating Jews worldwide. Through debate, compromise, and organization, Zionism became the central expression of Jewish national revival, one that laid the groundwork for the eventual establishment of the Jewish State of Israel in 1948. The story of Zionism's transition from political aspiration to practical realization is deeply intertwined within the waves of immigration known as the Aliyot, the ascents of Jews returning to the land of Israel. The early settlers who arrived in Ottoman Palestine during the late 19th and early 20th centuries faced immense challenges, but also forged a vibrant new society that became the heart of the Zionist project. The first Aliyah, between 1882 to 1903, marked the beginning of the modern Jewish return to the ancestral homeland. Most of these early immigrants came from Eastern Europe, driven by a combination of escalating anti-Semitic violence, such as pogroms in Russia and Romania, and inspired by the nationalist dream of rebuilding a Jewish homeland. These pioneers were deeply motivated by ideological conviction. Many were influenced by proto-Zionist thinkers like Leon Pinska, who emphasized the need for Jewish self-reliance and national revival. The early settlers sought to create agricultural communities that would reconnect the Jewish people to the land, a powerful symbolic and practical break from centuries of diaspora life largely confined to urban centers and trades. The agricultural colonies established during the first Aliyah were often modest and faced enormous difficulties. Settlers contended with unfamiliar climate, malaria-infested swamps, scarce resources, and hostile local authorities. Despite these hardships, settlements such as Rishon LeZion, Zichron Yaakov, and Petach Tikva were founded, supported financially and organized by philanthropic groups like Baron Edmund de Rothschild. Rothschild's support was crucial, but also sometimes a source of tension, as his top-down management style clashed with the pioneers' aspirations for autonomy. The second Aliyah, between 1904 to 1914, brought a new wave of settlers who were younger, more ideologically passionate, and often influenced by socialist and labor Zionism. This group played a decisive role in shaping the future character of the Yishuv. They emphasized collective ownership, egalitarianism, and Jewish labor. The idea that Jews should reclaim their dignity and identity through working their own land. The kibbutz movement emerged during this period as an experimental model of communal living and agriculture. These collective farms embodied a vision of social justice and unity, becoming a hallmark of the Zionist enterprise. Notable kibbutzim like Degania and Ein Harod became centers of innovation and cultural revival. Another defining feature of the second Aliyah was the renewed commitment to the Hebrew language. Hebrew was transformed from a primarily liturgical tongue into a spoken, everyday language. Pioneers like Eliezer ben Yehuda and others promoted Hebrew in schools, homes, and public life, believing that a shared language was essential to national unity. Life in Ottoman-controlled Palestine was difficult for the early Jewish immigrants. The region was underdeveloped, with limited infrastructure, harsh environmental conditions, and a small, predominantly Arab population that was often wary or hostile toward newcomers. immigrants faced frequent economic hardships, including lack of capital, limited access to water, and poor transportation. Malaria and other diseases were common, leading to high mortality rates in some areas. Legal restrictions imposed by Ottoman authorities complicated land purchases and settlement efforts. Despite these difficulties, the new immigrants maintained a resilient spirit of hope and determination. Their work in draining swamps, planting forests, and developing irrigation systems transformed the landscape gradually. These physical acts of making the desert bloom took on deep symbolic meaning, representing the restoration of Jewish life and sovereignty in the land of their ancestors. The new immigrants also worked to establish educational institutions that reflected their national and cultural aspirations. Hebrew language schools were founded to teach children the revived language and Zionist ideals. The arts began to flourish, creating a rich cultural life that linked the new immigrants to both Jewish tradition and modern European influences. Social and political organizations developed alongside these cultural efforts. The Histadrut, or General Federation of Labor, and Haganah, Defense Organization, would later emerge from these early communal structures, playing critical roles in the development of the Yishuv and eventual founding of the State of Israel. The early Zionist settlers were not simply building homes. They were consciously creating a new Jewish identity, one rooted in connection to the land, labor, language, and shared national purpose. Education was central to this vision. The establishment of Hebrew schools and youth movements aimed to cultivate a generation that would carry forward the Zionist dream with a strong sense of cultural pride and responsibility. Schools taught not only language and history, but also modern sciences and agriculture, preparing youth to contribute to the physical and intellectual rebuilding of the nation. Agriculture was more than an economic activity. It was a means of reclaiming Jewish dignity and self-sufficiency. For centuries, Jews had often been confined to commerce or urban trades. The pioneers' embrace of farming and manual labor was a deliberate break with diaspora stereotypes and a declaration of renewal. This agricultural work was closely linked to a revived connection to Jewish tradition and the land's ancient rhythms. The immigrants observed the agricultural commandments of the Torah, celebrated festivals like Sukkot and Shavuot with renewed meaning, and aligned their work with the cycles of nature. Alongside physical labor and education, cultural life blossomed. Hebrew literature, poetry, and theater provided outlets for creative expression and national discourse. Writers like Chaim Nachman Bialik and others became influential in shaping modern Hebrew culture and identity. The revival of Hebrew as a living language was both a symbol and a tool of national revival. Unlike the Yiddish-speaking Jews of Europe, these settlers spoke Hebrew daily. The early Yishuv was marked by a pioneering spirit of ingenuity, resilience, and optimism, despite numerous obstacles. These settlers laid the essential foundations, physically, culturally, and institutionally, for the Jewish state to come. Their struggles and achievements remain a source of inspiration in Israel's collective memory. One of the most extraordinary aspects of the Zionist project was the revival of Hebrew, a language that for centuries had existed primarily as a sacred literary and prayer language, but was transformed into a vibrant spoken tongue that would unite a diverse people and form the cultural backbone of the new Jewish society. At the heart of this revival stands the figure of Eliezer ben Yehuda, often called the father of modern Hebrew. Born in Lithuania in 1858, ben Yehuda grew up speaking Yiddish and learning Hebrew only in religious contexts. Yet he was inspired by the vision that Hebrew could be restored as the everyday language of the Jewish people, a tool to build national identity and unity in the land of Israel. In 1881, motivated by both nationalist ideals and a profound personal conviction, ben Yehuda immigrated to Ottoman Palestine. He embarked on a monumental mission to make Hebrew the living, breathing language of daily life. This was no small task. Hebrew had not been spoken as a mother tongue for nearly 2 millennia. It was considered a language of prayer and study, rich in ancient texts, but lacking modern vocabulary for everyday objects, technology, and concepts. Ben Yehuda's efforts were pioneering and deeply personal. He spoke only Hebrew at home with his family, raising his children as the first native speakers of modern Hebrew. He tirelessly worked to expand the language's vocabulary, coining new words derived from biblical roots to express contemporary realities. Words for electricity, newspaper, and bicycle were among his innovations. Ben Yehuda's revival went far beyond individual efforts. He championed the establishment of Hebrew schools, where children were taught all subjects in Hebrew, immersing them in the language from a young age. These schools became crucibles for the next generation of Hebrew speakers and advocates. Hebrew newspapers and periodicals also played a crucial role. Publications such as Hapoel Hatzair and Hashiloach disseminated news in Hebrew, giving the language a modern public presence and helping to normalize its use among immigrants from different backgrounds. The revival was not without controversy. Some Orthodox communities resisted, fearing that turning Hebrew into a secular spoken language would diminish its sacredness. Others doubted whether a language dormant for so long could truly be revived as a means of everyday communication. Yet the practical realities of building a new society demanded a shared language. The Jewish immigrants hailed from many lands, Russia, Poland, Yemen, Morocco, and more, speaking Yiddish, Ladino, Arabic, and other languages. Hebrew became a unifying force, a common tongue that transcended ethnic and cultural differences, and nurtured a collective identity rooted in history and faith. The linguistic unity was vital to the Zionist vision. It enabled the creation of a national culture centered on Hebrew literature, poetry, theater, and education. Writers like Chaim Nachman Bialik and Shaul Chernikovsky produced works that celebrated Jewish history and aspirations, further embedding Hebrew in the soul of the people. By the time the State of Israel was founded in 1948, Hebrew was firmly established as the language of government, education, media, and everyday life. The dream that once seemed impossible had become reality. Hebrew was reborn as the heartbeat of a living nation. Today, Hebrew continues to evolve, absorbing new influences and adapting to modern life, but its revival remains a powerful symbol of Jewish resilience and renewal. It shows how language can do more than communicate. It can build identity, community, and a nation. The period of World War I and its aftermath was a pivotal moment in the history of Zionism and the establishment of a Jewish homeland. This era marked a significant shift in political realities, strategic diplomacy, and international recognition that helped transform Herzl's vision from a hopeful dream into a practical political project with growing global legitimacy. At the outset of World War I, the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was dominated by the waning Ottoman Empire, which controlled Palestine and much of the surrounding region. The war itself became a crucial turning point for the Zionist movement because it brought new players, especially the British Empire, into the equation. Jewish leaders recognized the importance of securing the backing of a major world power to advance their dream. Zionist diplomacy intensified during the war, with representatives from the movement engaging British officials and other influential figures to promote the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Central to this diplomatic effort was Chaim Weizmann, a chemist turned political leader who would later become the first president of Israel. Weizmann's work was instrumental in the British authorities' support of a Jewish homeland. He and other leaders argued that the Jewish people had a historical, spiritual claim to the land of Israel, and that establishing a Jewish national home there would benefit the British by fostering stability in the Middle East. The British government, grappling with wartime challenges and aiming to secure allies in a complex region, gradually warmed to the Zionist cause. The efforts of Jewish diplomats culminated in the issuance of the historic Balfour Declaration on November 2, 1917. The Balfour Declaration was a succinct but groundbreaking statement issued by the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, in a letter addressed to Lord Rothschild, a prominent British Jewish leader and Zionist supporter. It expressed Britain's official support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The exact wording of the declaration was carefully crafted to balance British interests and sensitivities in the region. It stated, "His Majesty's Government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country." Though the declaration did not promise a full sovereign Jewish state, nor clarify the future status of the Arab population in Palestine, it was nonetheless a monumental political endorsement. For the first time, a major world power had explicitly backed the Zionist aim of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This endorsement galvanized the Zionist movement. It lent legitimacy and urgency to the cause and signaled that the dream of national revival was now on the international agenda. The years of World War I saw dramatic upheavals in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire, long in decline, was defeated and dismantled by the Allied powers. This opened the door for new political arrangements in the region. In the aftermath of the war, the League of Nations created the Mandate System, assigning Britain administrative control over Palestine and other territories. The British Mandate for Palestine, formalised in 1922, incorporated the principles of the Balfour Declaration and charged Britain with facilitating the establishment of the Jewish national home. This period also saw increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, known as Aliyah. Encouraged by both the Zionist leadership and the new international framework, Jewish pioneers established settlements, agricultural communities, and infrastructure despite ongoing challenges and tensions with the Arab population. The geopolitical shift, British control replacing Ottoman rule, brought new possibilities but also new complexities. Britain had to balance its commitments to both Jews and Arabs a difficult task that shaped much of the region's subsequent history. The Balfour Declaration and the British Mandate were not the end, but rather the beginning of a careful, multi-layered process of securing international legitimacy for a Jewish national homeland. Zionist leaders understood that political endorsement from Britain alone would not suffice. They needed broader support from other major powers and international bodies. This led them to the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, to enshrine the rights of the Jewish people to their homeland in Palestine within international law. The San Remo Conference of 1920 and the subsequent League of Nations mandate confirmed these principles. At the same time, Zionist organizations like the WZO expanded their activities, building institutions to support Jewish settlement and development. The establishment of the Jewish National Fund focused on land purchase and infrastructure, vital for creating a sustainable community. Diplomacy was pragmatic and multifaceted. It aimed to demonstrate that the Jewish presence in Palestine was not only a historical and moral claim, but also an economic and political asset that could help modernize the region. The involvement of Jewish leaders in international forums also served to counter opposition from some Arab leaders and other states who rejected the Zionist project and feared displacement or marginalization. Despite diplomatic progress, the situation on the ground was often tense and marked by clashes between Jewish immigrants and the Arab population. British authorities found themselves caught between competing promises and conflicting communities. The period surrounding World War I and the Balfour Declaration was a defining moment in the Zionist movement's transition from idealistic advocacy to concrete political action. The British endorsement provided an unprecedented level of international recognition and practical support. The dismantling of Ottoman control and the creation of the mandate system opened a new chapter in the history of Palestine and the Jewish people. Most importantly, this era laid the groundwork for the eventual establishment of the State of Israel. The diplomatic and political achievements of the time enabled the Zionist movement to expand its institutions, increase Jewish immigration, and cultivate a national identity rooted in the land. While challenges remained and conflicts would grow in the decades ahead, the Balfour Declaration remains a symbol of hope and validation for millions of Jews worldwide. It marked a significant turning point in the struggle for Jewish self-determination, affirming that the dream of returning to the ancestral homeland was no longer a distant aspiration, but a goal embraced on the world stage. While the land remained under British administration, the Jewish community, known as the Yishuv, was rapidly evolving into a political, social, and economic entity that laid the essential foundations for the future state of Israel. This period was marked by waves of immigration, institution building, community organization, defense preparations, and cultural revival. Despite lacking formal sovereignty, the Jewish population in Palestine was building all the key elements of statehood, earning the description of a state in waiting. The British Mandate era saw several waves of Jewish immigration, or Aliyah, that significantly expanded the Yishuv. These immigration waves reflected both the push factors of growing persecution in Europe and Arab lands, and the pull of Zionist ideal to settle the ancestral homeland. The third Aliyah, between 1919 to 1923, followed the war and the Balfour Declaration, bringing idealistic pioneers who sought to build agricultural settlements and develop the land. Many of these newcomers were influenced by socialist ideals, contributing to the establishment of collective farms known as kibbutzim and cooperative communities called moshavim. The fourth Aliyah, between 1924 to 1928, was largely driven by economic hardship and anti-Semitic policies in Eastern Europe, especially Poland. This wave brought more urban professionals and entrepreneurs who helped to develop the economy, commerce and industry. The fifth Aliyah, between 1929 to 1939, was triggered by the rise of Nazism and fascism in Europe. Tens of thousands of Jews, many highly skilled and educated, immigrated to Palestine, dramatically transforming the Yishuv's social and cultural life. With each wave, the Jewish population grew not only in numbers, but also in organizational capacity. The immigrants brought a diversity of backgrounds and ideologies, fueling vibrant debates about the nature of Jewish society and statehood. One of the remarkable features of the Mandate period was the development of a sophisticated network of Jewish institutions that effectively governed the community internally. At the heart of this institutional framework was the Jewish Agency for Palestine, established in 1929. Originally created to represent Jewish interests to the British authorities and the international community, the Jewish Agency gradually assumed broader responsibilities, including immigration, settlement planning, education, health and welfare. Alongside the Jewish Agency, numerous organizations focused on specific areas of community life. The Histadrut, founded in 1920, became the dominant labor federation, organizing workers, building cooperative enterprises, and playing a pivotal role in the Yishuv's economic development. Educational institutions flourished as well. The Yishuv prioritized Hebrew language schools to nurture a new generation of Jewish citizens and a shared language and national consciousness. The Hebrew University of Jerusalem, established in 1925, became a leading center of Jewish learning, research and culture. Local municipal councils and communal committees took on increasing responsibilities in urban areas, managing housing, sanitation and public services. These institutions functioned as a proto-government, gaining experience in administration and self-rule. As tensions between the Jewish and Arab populations intensified, the need for organized defense became paramount. The British authorities maintained overall control of security, but the Jewish community began developing its own paramilitary organizations to protect settlements and maintain order. The most prominent of these was the Haganah, formed in 1920 as a secret defense militia. Initially focused on guarding Jewish agricultural settlements from attacks, the Haganah grew into a more structured and disciplined force, with training programs, intelligence operations, and arms procurement. The Haganah laid the groundwork for what would become the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Its existence gave the Yishuv a degree of security and self-reliance that was crucial during a time when British protection was often inconsistent or biased. Other groups, such as the Yorgun and Lehi, emerged later, advocating for a more aggressive stance against British rule and Arab opposition. Despite ideological differences, these organizations were part of the broader effort to defend the Jewish community and press for independence. While political sovereignty remained elusive, the Jewish community focused intensely on economic and social development, transforming Palestine into a thriving and self-sufficient society. Agriculture was a cornerstone of this transformation. New farming techniques, irrigation projects, and land reclamation efforts expanded arable land. The kibbutzim and moshavim became not only centers of agriculture, but also models of social cooperation and innovation. Industrial growth also accelerated. Factories, textile mills, construction companies, and food processing plants emerged, providing employment and reducing economic dependence on imports. The development of the Histadrut's economic enterprises was critical in creating a robust, labor-based economy. The cultural life of the Yishuv flourished as well. Hebrew newspapers, theatres, and literary circles helped forge a shared identity. Jewish artists, writers, and intellectuals contributed to a burgeoning national culture that was modern yet deeply connected to Jewish tradition. Despite challenges, including British immigration restrictions and Arab opposition, the community continued to expand housing, healthcare, and social services to meet the needs of its growing population. The path towards statehood was not without difficulties. The Yishuv's rapid growth intensified tensions with the Arab population, who opposed Jewish immigration. Violence erupted periodically, most notably during the Arab riots of 1929 and the 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt, events that deeply affected the Jewish community's sense of vulnerability and underscored the need for self-defense and political advocacy. The British Mandate authorities often found themselves caught in the middle, attempting to maintain order, but also issuing restrictions on Jewish immigration in response to Arab pressure. These limitations frustrated the Zionist movement and heightened calls for full independence. Within the Jewish community, ideological divisions over socialism, religion, and strategy sometimes caused internal friction, yet these debates also energized the political landscape and contributed to the development of democratic practices. By the end of the British Mandate period, the Jewish community in Palestine had built a remarkable infrastructure of institutions, defense, education, and economic enterprise. Though not yet sovereign, the Yishuv functioned as a state in waiting, equipped with the social and political tools needed for nationhood. The foundations laid during these decades made the eventual declaration of the State of Israel in 1948 possible. The experiences of self-governance, immigration absorption, cultural revival, and defense, shaped by a resilient and dynamic society ready to face the challenges of independence. The British Mandate period remains a critical chapter in the Zionist story, demonstrating how a determined community can build a nation even before it has a state, and how the vision of Jewish self-determination steadily moved from hope to reality. The catastrophic events of the Holocaust cast a long and tragic shadow over the Jewish people in the mid-20th century. 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazi regime, decimating communities across Europe and leaving survivors shattered and homeless. This unimaginable horror not only underscored the urgent need for a Jewish homeland, but also fundamentally transformed the Zionist movement, intensifying the drive to realize a sovereign state where Jews could find refuge, security, and self-determination. Before World War II, Zionism was already a powerful force, striving for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. However, the Holocaust revealed in stark, brutal terms the consequences of statelessness and vulnerability. The sheer scale of the genocide shattered illusions that Jews could rely on assimilation or the goodwill of other nations for protection. For survivors, displaced persons, and broader Jewish diaspora, Zionism became not just a political aspiration, but a matter of survival and hope. The idea of a sovereign Jewish state, once a dream and cultural revival project, now assumed the urgency of a lifeline. It was a refuge and a promise of safety from persecution that had brought such devastation to Europe. The Zionist leadership responded by redoubling their efforts to mobilize international support. In the camps, ghettos, and refugee settlements, the yearning for a return to the ancestral land was deeply felt. Stories circulated of survivors who, despite unimaginable suffering, dreamed of and planned for a future in Palestine, a future where Jewish life could thrive once again. The end of the war left hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors without homes or communities. These displaced persons found themselves in camps across Europe, often in limbo, struggling to rebuild their lives amid uncertainty. Displaced persons camps became hubs of Jewish political activism and cultural revival. The Zionist movement worked tirelessly within these camps to organize immigration to Palestine despite British restrictions, which had been tightened during the war years. Many survivors sought to escape the horrors of Europe and instability of post-war conditions by emigrating to Palestine. However, the British Mandate authorities, wary of Arab opposition and geopolitical complexities, limited Jewish immigration. This policy exacerbated tensions and led to increased efforts by Zionist groups to facilitate clandestine immigration, known as Aliyah Bet. The refugee crisis and the struggle for immigration rights galvanized international sympathy and highlighted the desperate need for a Jewish homeland. Jewish agencies and organizations lobbied world powers, advocating for the establishment of a state where Jews could live free from fear. One of the most emblematic episodes of this period was the story of the Exodus 1947, a ship carrying over 4,500 Jewish refugees from Europe attempting to reach Palestine illegally. The British intercepted the ship and forcibly turned it away, sending the refugees back to Europe, a move that sparked international outrage. The image of Holocaust survivors being denied entry to Palestine and effectively sent back to a continent still scarred by war was a powerful moral moment. Newsreels and photographs of the Exodus galvanized public opinion worldwide, particularly in the United States and Europe. It underscored the untenable position of Jewish refugees and intensified pressure on the British government and the United Nations to resolve the question of Jewish statehood. The Exodus became a symbol of Jewish resilience and moral imperative behind the Zionist cause. It highlighted the stark contrast between the refugees' yearning for safety and the geopolitical obstacles standing in their way. The post-war years witnessed a surge in international support for Zionism, driven by the urgency of the Holocaust's aftermath and the plight of displaced Jews. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine, recommending the creation of separate Jewish and Arab states. This decision was a historic milestone, reflecting a global recognition of the Jewish right to self-determination. However, the path to statehood was fraught with conflict, as Jewish aspirations clashed with Arab resistance and British withdrawal plans. Still, the determination of the Jewish community, bolstered by Holocaust survivors and the diaspora, was stronger than ever. The Holocaust irrevocably changed the trajectory of Zionism and Jewish history. The immense suffering and loss fueled an urgent, impassioned commitment to build a Jewish homeland, a place of refuge, dignity, and self-rule. The period of displaced persons, clandestine immigration, and symbolic events like the Exodus ship exemplify the resilience and the hope of a people determined to transform catastrophe into renewal. This chapter in Zionist history is not only a testament to survival, but also a profound reminder of why the dream of a Jewish state became a necessity, not merely a political ideal, but a vital refuge for a traumatized and dispersed people. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in modern history, a dramatic transformation of a millennia-old national aspiration into political reality. This moment, marked by the culmination of decades of Zionist vision, struggle, and resilience. It was a complex, multi-layered process shaped by international diplomacy and unyielding leadership. The birth of Israel was not only a political event, but also a cultural and spiritual renaissance, fulfilling the dream of Jewish self-determination first articulated by Theodor Herzl and nurtured through generations. In the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust, the urgent need for a Jewish homeland gained global momentum. The British, who had governed Palestine since the end of World War I under the League of Nations mandate, found themselves unable to reconcile growing tensions between Jewish immigrants and the Arab population. Amid rising violence and geopolitical shifts, Britain referred the issue to the United Nations. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 181, known as the UN Partition Plan. This proposal recommended dividing Palestine into two separate states, one Jewish and one Arab, while designating Jerusalem as an international city due to its religious significance. The Partition Plan was a historic breakthrough. For the first time, an international body formally endorsed the establishment of a Jewish state. Zionist leaders accepted the plan as a legal and diplomatic foundation to move forward. However, the plan also sowed deep controversy and conflict, as the Arab states vehemently rejected it, seeing it as unjust and a violation of their rights and homeland. Despite opposition, the plan symbolized a turning point. Zionism was no longer a dream or an aspiration. It was poised to become a sovereign reality. On May the 14th, 1948, just before the British mandate expired, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency and a pivotal Zionist leader, stood in Tel Aviv and proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. This declaration was a watershed moment, the realization of Herzl's vision for a Jewish homeland where Jews could live with self-governance. Ben-Gurion's declaration echoed centuries of Jewish longing for the return to Zion, referencing the deep historical and spiritual connection of the Jewish people to their land. The text emphasized principles of democracy, equality, and the ingathering of exiles, welcoming Jews from all over the world to the new nation. The declaration was both a hopeful proclamation and a call to arms. Within hours, neighboring Arab states launched military attacks seeking to prevent the birth of Israel. The ensuing War of Independence tested the young nation's survival, resilience, and unity. David Ben-Gurion's role in the establishment of Israel cannot be overstated. A charismatic and pragmatic leader, Ben-Gurion combined visionary zeal with political savvy and organizational skill. His leadership spanned decades, from early Zionist activism in Eastern Europe and Palestine, through the British Mandate period, to the tumultuous days of state formation. Ben-Gurion's vision was deeply influenced by the Zionist pioneers who saw the Jewish state as both a refuge and a renaissance. He understood the challenges ahead, not only military threats, but also the complex task of nation building, integrating diverse immigrant populations and fostering a shared identity. Under Ben-Gurion's leadership, institutions crucial to statehood were established or strengthened. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, unified various militias into a single national army. The Ministry of Absorption coordinated the massive waves of Jewish immigrants, and government agencies laid the groundwork for economic development, education, and social welfare. Ben-Gurion's pragmatism was also evident in his diplomatic efforts to gain recognition and support from world powers such as the United States and the Soviet Union. His ability to navigate these international relations while maintaining a focus on internal unity was vital. The formation of the state was not an abrupt break, but rather a continuation of the Zionist movement's cultural, educational, and institutional foundations. Many of the structures built during the decades of Zionist pioneering, such as the Jewish Agency, the Histadrut Labor Federation, the Kibbutz movement, and the revival of the Hebrew language, all became the pillars of Israeli society. The cultural renaissance that began with early Zionist immigrants blossomed into a vibrant national identity. The birth of Israel also brought enormous challenges. The immediate aftermath of the declaration saw full-scale war with neighboring Arab countries, forcing the young state to defend its existence under intense pressure. Despite material shortages, Israel managed to survive. The state faced the complex task of absorbing hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants. The birth of Israel was the fulfillment of a historic dream, a movement where centuries of Jewish longing, sacrifice, and political struggle converged. Herzl's vision of a Jewish state, once dismissed by many as unrealistic, had become a living reality. The legacy of Zionism is one of profound and multifaceted impact, shaping not only the political map of the Middle East, but also fundamentally transforming Jewish culture. Far beyond the establishment of the State of Israel, Zionism's influence has permeated language and social cohesion, and the very sense of what it means to be Jewish in a modern world. The legacy is ongoing, evolving as new generations reinterpret the Zionist vision in light of contemporary challenges and aspirations.